Well, thank you guys for joining me this morning. I wanted to talk about this week about kind of doing your own research on the products and getting to know the products, so that you feel like you have like some power and some knowledge because there is power in knowledge. And I know a lot of times we overuse, not overuse. I definitely don't want to say overuse, but we tend to rely on the chat groups or the team page to answer questions and don't actually like go and look for that information first. And so it kind of occurred to me maybe the reason is because we don't know where to go, where to look. And so it's just easy to go straight to those groups to see if other people can help us out. And so I wanted to kind of like empower you today on here are the ways that I research the products and some of the tools that I use to make sure that I have the information that I need when I'm recommending products. Another reason why I think this is super important is I want y'all to know every single time I go to research something, I learn something new, but it builds belief in the product. Like there is no bigger belief building activity than kind of like researching the ingredients, and seeing what they're known to do. I mean, even just this morning, I was looking something up as I was like kind of going through and preparing for this call. And I discovered that the vitamin D in our X factor is the D3, which is the more absorbable form than D2. Should have already known that. I don't know why I didn't, but it was just like when I first saw which vitamin D you want in it, I was like, oh, I hope that's what we have. And sure enough, it is. And so it just seems like every single time I look up something, I learn something new. And it's always something that just builds my belief in the products. So if you're not actively researching things, I really want you to encourage you to kind of make this part of your practice. So there's 5 tools really that I use when I'm researching products, and some of these are tools that I have created for y'all to be using. And so I want to make sure we're using all of these things. So before we go to ask the questions, I really want to encourage y'all to try to look it up first because A, it empowers you, and B, it builds that belief in you. So those are really the 2 big reasons I think it's more beneficial to try to look it up first than to just ask. And so the 5 tools I have, the first one is our resource page. So I've done a whole separate training on the research page, but in the resource page, one of the areas I use a lot is I have all the product ingredients in there. Of course, you can find this also by just going to shop and then clicking on the product and then looking at it. But some of the graphics when you go to shop are a whole lot smaller and they're kind of hard to read, the ingredients list on there. And the graphics are better over on the resource page. So if you go on the resource page, click on media, scroll down to product ingredients. There's a product ingredient sheet with a few key features and benefits on every single product right there. So it's just easier sometimes and it loads faster than going over to shop in your back office and trying to find it. The second one that I use a lot is scholar.google.com. So it's not your regular Google. It is a Google that will only search for medical documents and medical studies. And it is like validated, like actual, you're not going to get blogs, you're not going to get opinions, you're going to get facts. And so I love to use this whenever I'm researching, like, does this help with this? You know, is there any links between gut health and PCOS or things like that? And then you can find the actual medical studies. Now, when you're reading medical studies, I'm going to warn you, some of them are like they're written in layman's terms and they're real easy to read. And some of them are kind of articles and not actual medical studies, but they're simpler to follow. But some of them are like the straight up medical documents and they can be very like wordy and very so just kind of if you just scroll to the bottom, there's usually a conclusion at the very end. So I usually just scroll down, I want to see, is there a correlation between this and this? It's all I'm looking for. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not an expert at this. This is not what I'm good at. Don't get bogged down in the details unless you love it. Then go ahead, by all means, read all the details. But otherwise, just scroll to the bottom and you can find the conclusion. Is there a correlation between this and this? And that's what I'm looking for. The other reason I love to like look to see if there's medical documents is because some of our customers are going to be skeptics. Some of our customers are the type personalities that want facts. They want to know, is this actually correlated to this? I don't care what your testimonies say. I want to know what the science says. So you're going to run into people like that. So it is very helpful to be like, okay, so maybe the study isn't done on X Factor Plus, but here's a few studies on the ingredients in X Factor Plus and why they help with this, just kind of an example. Another resource that y'all can be using is our ambassador training manual. It is at the very top of the team page, and I'll actually just drop the link right here. I know there's a lot of dated information in this, as I made this. Actually, the first time I made it was like in 2013. I have definitely updated it since then, but it's been something we've had around since the very, very beginning. And if you scroll to the product section, in the very beginning, I have like page numbers that things are on. And if you go to page 45, where the products are, I literally I've done all the research on all the products. Our newest products are not on here yet. I don't have Reset. I don't think the greens are on here. But our primary products are, and this is like some of the old research I had done, and there are actually links to medical studies in here. I've broken it down by ingredient. I've given the studies for you. So I've done a lot of the work I'm talking about here for you in this training manual. So if all else fails, that's a great place to come to look. This also has the product attribute guide. If you're not familiar with this, you can also find it in the help center of your back office. Just type in product attributes. This is a super, super, super useful graph. So it tells you what's non-GMO, what's vegetarian, what's gluten-free, what has peanut allergies, what has dairy, what has soy. It goes through all the allergies. It tells you what type of capsule it is. So any of those just real common questions, like, is this gluten-free? The answer is always yes. All of Plex's products are gluten-free on that one. But does it have soy? There are some with soy. Vital Biome actually does have soy. And so that's something you can kind of come and look at this chart if someone asks you a question. And even when people ask me gluten-free, sometimes I double guess myself. I'm like 99.999% sure the answer is always yes. But it is kind of nice to come and look at this chart and be like, okay, yes, everything is still gluten-free. But everything's not vegetarian. So that's another real common one. And it's because of the capsule usually, because some of our capsules are gelatin and some of them are not. And so you can just open the capsule for people who don't want the gelatin capsules and that they still want to take the ProBio 5. That's an alternative you can give to them. So that's our third one, is that training manual. The fourth one is just straight Google. Don't underestimate Google. I mean, I know someone was asking in our chat yesterday, what do I use for PCOS? The number one thing I Google if somebody comes to me and says, I have this, can Plexus help? I type in gut health, the disease name. And that will pretty much give you a real quick answer. Will Triplex help this problem? Usually it's a yes. Gut health is connected to so many things. But then after that, you can also kind of look. Let's use PCOS, for example. I'll type in PCOS vitamin deficiency. And then those are kind of the two key things I'm trying to look at. Is this tied to gut health? Are there certain vitamin deficiencies that typically are tied to this disease that they need those supplements for? And so not necessarily trying to find an article that says it's going to cure it, but I want to know, what do they need to help them support their journey in this health journey? What are they lacking? What's going on that might be the underlying thing? Just be cautious. Like I said, I like to use Google too, alongside scholar.google, because Google will give you the more friendly version of things. But just be cautious. Even the stuff that sometimes comes up in the big bold print at the top could be opinion and not fact. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes the stuff that you're seeing on here are being pulled from blogs, they're being pulled from articles that are just based on opinion. So just know that some of the stuff here is, of course, we all know that Google's not all true, but just keep that in mind too when you're sharing information. I like to kind of start there because it's easier to find, and then I go see if I can back it up by science on scholar.google. And then the last tool that I use is the back office. So don't underestimate, there's a lot of stuff there too. Like if you look in the help center and just kind of like, there's a quick search, you can type in things there to kind of get an idea. So like if I go into the help center and I type in gluten-free, let's just see what comes up. It's a little bit harder to use. Like I said, I'm just now testing this. But if I type in gluten, a great thing that does come up is what steps does Plexus take to prevent allergen cross-contamination in the manufacturing process? So there's a whole article over that. So if you have someone that has a real severe gluten allergy and they're really nervous about that, now I have something else I can send them. So I'll click on that little link and it gives you a whole it tells you about how there's no cross contamination, and then it refers you to that product attribute sheet there too. So again, like if you can't find something, it's not always foolproof over here, but make sure you're using the help center too, because there is a lot of information here in the help center, and it's just easy because there's a little search bar. So just like you're using Google or something else, you can just go in and type in something in the search bar. So usually when I'm doing this, it brings me down. Like you kind of go down a rabbit hole as you're researching. Like I said this morning, when I typed in PCOS gut health, the thing that popped up was that it is closely linked. And then I typed in PCOS vitamin deficiency, and I found out they tend to be deficient in vitamin D. And so that's when I went, and then after that, I go from that to the looking up the product ingredients. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. So I went over to the resource page. I pulled up the product ingredient list to X Factor, because actually the one in the back office was real hard to see. I actually tried to look there first. It was real hard to see. But I went over and I looked up the one in X Factor, and I found that it has vitamin D. So then but it only has 100%. I know some of these vitamins people like to put way too much in there. And so I went to just look up and said, vitamin D absorbency, like what helps your body absorb vitamin D better. And that's when I read that D3 is better than D2. And I also learned that it's important to take vitamin D with like higher fatty meals. And so that's when I thought, I usually recommend to take X Factor with food, but it's usually because I don't want it to have their bellies upset. But now here's another reason why it's good to take X Factor with food, because they're able to absorb the vitamin D better. So it looks like, Debbie, do you have a question, or do you do that too?
I want to just say something real quick.
Yeah.
My husband was deficient in vitamin D. And before we started on Plexus, and he was taking prescription strength. And since having him on it, I don't remember when we came out with X Factor and X Factor Plus, but we got on it when we came out with it, and he is no longer deficient and has not been deficient since the last time we did his annual blood work, and he was early on. So it does help. And we knew about the D3, and we knew that was in it, but
Yeah.
you don't know until you experience, and it did help him.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, so just let yourself go down like the little rabbit trail when you're researching, and it kind of one thing leads to the next thing and leads to the next thing. And as you're doing this, you're learning things along the way that's like building your knowledge in the products, it's building your belief, and you're learning new tips. And so this is how, like, nobody starts an expert at the products. And there's a lot of information that you tend to forget, and then you have to like re-research it. Like a lot of this stuff, I probably stumbled upon the D3 like 5 years ago and just forgot, so it's okay to like forget and relearn and forget and relearn. Like it's just part of the process. But I really want to make sure that y'all are like digging in and not skipping over this process, because if somebody just tells you the information, which is kind of funny that Debbie, you were sharing this before I started recording about how like as being studious and the different study styles for people, more than likely, because she was sharing that her brother, which just was kind of like she'd just tell him and he would go in and ace the quiz, and she had a harder time with the test. Honestly, that's probably more test taking skills, but I guarantee you, if we were to ask you questions about it today, he probably doesn't even remember he took the class. And you probably do actually remember some of the things that you learned. You're just so much more likely to retain the information if you go in and do the work to find it versus if somebody just tells you. Like our brains just don't absorb the information the same. And so that's another reason why, and like I said, you just find out different little nuggets along the way as you're looking up things.
And for me, it helps when it's personal.
Yes.
When it's personal, I don't forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and usually we are looking up something because it is personal. You're looking up something to help a customer or to, and when somebody asks you a question, and let me make sure that, I reinforce this too. Like if you're new and you're starting out and somebody asks you a question about the products, do not feel like you need to answer it immediately. It's totally okay to say, no, I don't know that. Give me just a second. I'm going to go find out and I'll get back to you. And that's when it's like, it's okay to like take a minute and pause, do the research. And then after you've done the research, if you're still unsure, go ask for validation. That's when it's time to go into the groups and ask the groups for validation to kind of be like, is what I found true? Like, is this actually what other people are experiencing? And so then I think that's a great time to like hop into our chat group and be like, hey, have y'all found that triplex is best for this, for this disease? Or, I keep saying PCOS. I'm just using that one as an example. But have y'all found that it's best for that? Or do y'all think it's better to do something different? And so I think that's when it's a good time to go in and then just to get that validation. And then you can go back to your customer feeling really solid in the advice that you're going to give them. And not only do you feel solid in the advice, that's the other thing. When you ask somebody and they tell you, and then you tell them, and then they ask you another question back, you're usually like, oh, I don't know that either. Let me go ask. Like you're not solid in that belief. If you did all the research first and they ask you something and they ask you a question back, you probably know it because you read it just a second ago. And you also feel a lot more confident when you're presenting this information to them. And when you're confident in the sale, you're much more likely to close the deal. And so there's just so many reasons why like kind of digging in and doing the research, even if it kind of goes against like your natural personality and not something you like this part of the work, like don't skip over it. So do we have any questions? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead.
I'll tell you one other thing real quick. I like reading. I'm on several health pages. You have a health page. I have a health page. And every time I come across somebody's testimony about like PCOS or whatever that hits home, I snag it and put it on there because it's also that validation and
Yes.
You can read other people's stories that may touch someone that you can tag someone in.
Yes. Yeah. And I do think, like I said, along with the science and the knowledge, then you go in and you get those third-party validations from the testimonies and those things. And it's like all parts of the piece of the puzzle. Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording now and then we'll give us a little task to do. Let me see where